Hi, it's Katrina. Today, we'll delve into some of the most mysterious, hidden places on the planet. Some of these places were so high up in the sky, you would risk your life just trying to get there. Or they were covered by sand dunes or carved into cliffs to hide from invaders. But now, thanks to drones and even earthquakes, we can now see many new ancient secrets. Let's take a look, and then you can let me know which place you would like to visit in the comments. Chapel in the sky. Have you ever wanted to scale a mountain and face certain death to get to a monolithic church? I haven't, but for those of you who would risk it, you'll have to travel to Ethiopia. Known as Abuna Yematagu, this place is, quite literally, a chapel in the sky. It's located in the Geralta Mountains at a height of 8,464 feet. And it's carved right into the side of a rocky cliff. Although this place is now widely known, not many make the journey to the chapel. I mean, imagine being the first person to discover the church. You're looking for some adventure, so you decide to climb up a mountain, where you see what could be a cave at the very top. You narrowly avoid slipping and falling several times, but eventually you make it to the cave. However, when you enter the cavern, you see that it's not a cave at all. It's a church. Inside, it's decorated with beautiful and vibrant paintings in near-perfect condition. You may not know it, but the lack of humidity and dry air preserved these paintings, keeping them in their original state of glory. You almost died to get there, but that's by design. The church builders picked this location as a way to be closer to God. Ethiopia is an extremely religious place, with nearly 50% of the population considering themselves to be Ethiopian Orthodox Christians. There's no easy way to reach the church. There are no stairs or elevators. In fact, it's arguably one of the most inaccessible places of worship on the planet. To get there, you have to climb on foot. But be careful if you make the journey, because even if you reach the church, it's surrounded by a drop of 650 feet on every side. It's named after Father Abuna Yemata, a 5th century priest. He and his followers supposedly carved the chapel out of the stone, and it sat undisturbed for centuries, only being visited by wandering monks and Christians. The frescoes seem to depict figures from the Old and New Testament, themed around the 12 apostles and the 9 saints. The most ancient things you'll find here are in the form of triptychs and diptychs, works of art with either 2 or 3 panels. They date back over 500 years, completed sometime in the 15th century. Climbing the cliff is seen as an act of faith, and reaching the chapel is your reward. Despite this difficult task, it's said that Father Abuna Yemata worshipped at the church every Sunday. Talk about commitment, and he must have been a very good rock climber. Vardzia. Around 900 years ago, one of the most impressive cave cities in the world was built into a cliffside, shielding it from outsiders. That is, until an earthquake revealed it, leaving it vulnerable to Ottoman invaders. This place was hidden extremely well until then, with only one entrance through a secret tunnel, and it's still well hidden today, as it's incredibly hard to get to. It's situated at an altitude reaching over 4,200 feet. The Bronze Age city of Vardzia is nestled on the slopes of Erusheti Mountain in Georgia. It was initially built as a defensive fortress during King Georgi III's reign in the 12th century. It flourished under the leadership of his daughter, Queen Tamar, later evolving into a bustling monastic complex and cultural hub. Vardzia isn't really connected all that well to the rest of the country, so if you plan to visit, you'll need to make arrangements in one of its small neighboring cities. And if you're an English speaker, good luck trying to find someone you can communicate with. You'll either need to find an English-speaking tour guide or travel with someone who speaks Georgian. Vardzia sprawls across more than a quarter of a mile and is comprised of 13 levels. Originally built completely underground, this place once had over 6,000 apartments and 2,000 resident monks. Queen Tamar was said to occupy 366 apartments, constantly changing her residence to avoid detection. It's like when modern elites build bunkers in the event of a global cataclysm. If an asteroid hits or war reaches their doorstep, they can slip away to their bunker, where they're safe from harm. This place kept the people of Vardzia isolated, allowing them to hide from the Ottomans and other potential threats. But if this place was underground, carved into solid stone, where did they get their food? Well, the architects of Vardzia were smart. They created a sophisticated irrigation network. They channeled water from the mountain to sustain the city's inhabitants and agricultural terraces. And this ensured that the people had food and never went thirsty. Seems like a pretty nice place to live, right? Well, it was, at least until 1283, when a devastating earthquake exposed the city. The inhabitants were going about their day as usual when suddenly the earth began to tremble. Stones cracked and their cave ceilings crumbled, revealing the blue sky above. This must have been quite a shock, especially to people who had lived their whole lives underground. No longer sheltered, Vardzia was left wide open for attack, and the ensuing conflicts with the Ottoman invaders left the city ravaged, leading to its eventual abandonment in the 16th century. Not everyone left, though. Despite the adversities, a few resilient monks stayed behind, maintaining a semblance of Vardzia's legacy. The Soviet era between 1922 and 1991 witnessed renewed interest in the cave city, and now ongoing excavation efforts and partial restoration endeavors breathe new life into the ancient complex. They want to return this place to its original state because it's now considered to be one of the oldest and most impressive cave cities in the world. Who wants to visit? Skara Brae. One of the most perfectly preserved villages dating back to the Stone Age in Europe is known as Skara Brae. For hundreds of years, this place was covered by a sand dune in Scotland, on the shore of the Bay of Skyle. Located on the Orkney Islands, it was exposed by a storm in 1850. You'd think that the storm would reduce this place to rubble, but its structures were found in remarkable condition. Even the furniture was found completely intact, probably because everything in the village was carved out of stone. The well-preserved state of Skara Brae fascinated archaeologists. So, in the 1860s, William Watt led the charge to uncover the secrets of this place. He initially only discovered 4 buildings, but a storm in 1926 revealed even more. Fast forward to the disco-loving 70s, and radiocarbon dating revealed that Skara Brae's ancient origins were from 3200 BC to 2200 BC. The dwellings in this village stand 8 feet tall, and yet nothing was placed between the stones to hold them together. All these years later, and they are still standing, almost as if by magic. So what exactly is going on here? In reality, the architects of this place were beyond their time. They knew that the drift sand carried by the wind would fill the spaces between the rocks, preserving them in place. The village was made up of several of these dwellings, each one in the shape of a rectangle, but with rounded corners. The ancient inhabitants of this place would enter their homes through a narrow doorway, which they could close with a hefty rock slab. These people were living like the Flintstones, but they probably didn't keep dinosaurs as pets. That would be really cool, though. When the village was suddenly abandoned around 2200 BC, it was made up of 7 or 8 huts connected by paved pathways. 6 of these huts were buried partly underground, surrounded by a mixture of sand, peat ash, and waste, creating mounds called middens. Building their huts this way was pretty genius. It made their houses stable and insulated them from Orkney's harsh winter climate. The alleys between the huts eventually turned into tunnels with roofs made of stone slabs. The entire living area was also designed with a sewage system, collecting waste from each hut and channeling it into a central sewer. It likely didn't smell great, but hey, at least they weren't relieving themselves in buckets and throwing their waste directly onto the street like they were in medieval England. These people were farmers, tending to herds of sheep and cattle. They likely lived off the meat from their animals, as well as whatever they caught in the ocean. Relying exclusively on local materials for their equipment, like beach pebbles, stone, and animal bones, the villagers made pottery with elaborate decorations. The inhabitants of Skara Brae also had a keen sense of style, creating pendants of colored beads that they made from the bone marrow of sheep, the teeth of killer whales, or the roots of cows' teeth. There is also evidence that they played games here, with artifacts being discovered like walrus ivory dice and knuckle bones. What may surprise you is that this current village is only half of it. Archaeologists have discovered that underneath the foundations and walls of the existing stone huts are even older structures. These lower levels were built using the same material as the upper levels, decorated with incised and relief designs. One motif in particular, called the true spiral, is the only example of this pattern that's known in prehistoric Britain. It was discovered in the lower level of one of these huts, engraved into a shard of ceramic. The mysterious Sphinx. Deep in the heart of Egypt's Giza Plateau stands the Great Sphinx. This colossal monument has stood guard for millennia, but its origins are steeped in mystery. So, what secrets could it be hiding? About 6 miles west of Cairo, near the banks of the Nile River, the Great Sphinx commands attention. Its majestic form, carved from the bedrock of the plateau, reaches a staggering height of approximately 66 feet and stretches an impressive 240 feet in length. A masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship, the Sphinx is believed to embody the strength and power of the lion, gazing toward the eastern horizon, where the sun emerges to herald a new day. We could talk about the mysterious origins of the Sphinx, whether it was made under the rule of Pharaoh Khufu or if it's far more ancient. But today, we are going to go deeper, literally. We're going to discuss what could be hidden under the Sphinx. Under the monument are several tunnels and passages. These channels were created over thousands of years, and some even believe that somewhere under the Sphinx is the fabled Hall of Records. This is supposedly a library that contains all the secrets of the ancient world. But this hasn't been proven, at least as far as we know. Maybe this library really does exist, but it's been hidden from the public. It's not a stretch to consider, especially since civilians are prohibited from exploring these hidden tunnels. So, where does this theory come from? On his YouTube channel, amateur historian Matt Simpson referenced a book called Operations Carried On at the Pyramid of Giza in 1837. It was allegedly written by Colonel Howard Weiss, a 19th century Egyptologist. And in it, Weiss claims that through several reports and rumors in Egypt, he came to believe there was a secret door hidden beneath the Sphinx. He says that French engineers were excavating quite a bit when they found the door. Okay, so maybe there's a door, but where does it lead? Weiss writes that the door led into the body of the Sphinx. He even claimed that people who were part of the excavation affirmed that the door led to a vast tunnel system, connecting all of the pyramids and the Sphinx together. If what Weiss claims is true, it would be one of the most incredible discoveries of all time. But the secrets don't end there. In Weiss's book, he also speaks of 3 massive stone slabs called stelae that were originally in front of the Sphinx. One of them is known as the Dream Stela, supposedly built between 1479 and 1425 BC. This slab is still at the site today, but the other 2 were supposedly shipped off to the Louvre in Paris in the 19th century, and since then, little has been spoken of them. Matt Simpson supposedly came across a picture of one of the 2 missing stelae in Weiss's book. In an interview with the Daily Star, he says that the slab is engraved with the likeness of the Sphinx on top of a platform. According to him, it looks like the Sphinx is resting on what seems to be a doorway. The Dream Stela, the only remaining stelae at the site, also shows a door underneath the Sphinx, backing up Weiss's claims. But what does the other stelae show? Unfortunately, that's a mystery at the moment. Until the stone slab is reanalyzed and brought back to life, it looks like the secrets of the Sphinx remain hidden. And if there is a tunnel system underneath the monument, what treasures could it hold? Ise Grand Shrine. There is a hidden gem in Japan that you'll never be able to visit. In the middle of a sacred forest, there is a shrine that was built over 2,000 years ago. Known as the Ise Grand Shrine or Ise Jingu, this place is dedicated to the solar goddess Amaterasu. You can get pretty close to the shrine, but it's strictly off limits to enter, unless you're a priest or part of the imperial family. The commoners are restricted by a wooden fence, leaving them to wonder what the inside looks like. Initially built in 4 BC, it's since been restored and rebuilt. This place is more than just one shrine, though. It's a sprawling complex made up of 125 buildings, and 16 of those structures are rebuilt every 20 years, including features like the Uju Bridge and the Torii Gateway. The gateway stands at the entrance of the complex, symbolically representing the transition from the mundane to the sacred. However, the bridge is less symbolic. It's just a bridge, but it's unclear why it requires updating every 2 decades. Ise Grand Shrine is the ancestral shrine of Japan's emperors. Looking at this place, you'll likely picture samurai and get flashes of scenes from Mulan. You may be tempted to take pictures to show your friends back home, but that's off limits. This rule is strictly policed, and you could be fined or even jailed for breaking it. I don't even know what I'm going to show you in this video. Amazingly, the shrine was constructed without the use of a single nail. Instead, the buildings were made using cypress logs and kaya grass for the roofs. This method is still used when structures are rebuilt every 20 years, and some of the logs used in construction are from 400-year-old trees, which only adds to the sacredness of the site. This place holds some treasure as well. It is said to house a holy object known as the Sacred Mirror. You might be thinking, that's it? Just a mirror? Well, mirrors in fairy tales do a lot of things. And the mirror has a backstory. It supposedly represents honesty or wisdom, depending on the source. In ancient Japan, mirrors symbolized truth because they reflected what was shown. They were considered to be objects of reverence and mystique. Is this reminding anyone of Snow White? The sacred mirror was allegedly forged by an ancestral deity, and eventually the mirror was handed over to the Imperial House of Japan. A fire in the year 1040 was said to have burned the compartment where the mirror was held, but whatever remains of the mirror is kept in this shrine. Secrets in the Amazon rainforest. Alright folks, buckle up because we are diving into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. Hidden beneath the lush canopy, like buried treasure waiting to be found, are not 1, not 2, but 24 ancient settlements. The discovery was made in 2023 by a team of researchers from the Brazilian National Institute for Space Research, and they could hardly believe what they found. We are talking about structures that were built way before Columbus ever sailed the ocean blue. These villages are like time capsules from the past, built by indigenous people who once called the Amazon home. These constructions aren't your run-of-the-mill buildings. These are ancient towns, fortified villages, ceremonial structures, and even riverbank sites, all tucked away in the depths of the forest. But if these places are so well hidden, how did we ever find them? This discovery was thanks to some cutting-edge tech called LiDAR. This fancy gadget lets scientists peek through the thick forest canopy and create 3D models of what lies beneath. It's like having X-ray vision for the rainforest. Among the jaw-dropping discoveries is a type of settlement known as a plaza town. Imagine big ditches, circular plazas, and straight roads, like something straight out of a history book. And get this, the researchers predict that there could be anywhere from 10,000 to 24,000 more of these ancient sites just waiting to be uncovered in the Amazon. But why is all of this important? Well, it turns out that these indigenous people were pros at managing the forest and cultivating plants. Their techniques have even left a mark on the ecology of the modern Amazon. You can think of them as the original environmentalists, peacefully coexisting with nature. They incorporated the rainforest into their settlements, instead of chopping down trees to make room for their buildings like we do today. So while the Amazon might seem like an untouched wilderness, it's actually full of ancient wonders that have yet to be fully explored. While these settlements have been identified using LiDAR, we still have a long way to go before researchers can make it to these sites and actually analyze them on the ground. The rainforest is still full of danger. There are jaguars, anacondas, highly toxic poison dart frogs, and flesh-eating piranhas. They could be lurking around any turn, so finding someone willing to put their life on the line in the name of research is extremely difficult. Who wants to go in with a machete these days? But hopefully in the future, these ancient places will be revealed in more detail to the public, and we'll learn more about the mysterious builders. Cave of the Crystals. In the year 2000, miners searching for ore deposits near Nica, Mexico, discovered a place that looks straight out of a fairy tale. Imagine that you're strolling through a dark cave. Then, suddenly, you come across a cavern filled to the brim with giant crystals. You might rub your eyes and think you were hallucinating at first, but this place is 100% real. The miners found themselves surrounded by massive white crystals in the horseshoe-shaped cave. Gleaming pillars of gypsum that were as big as telephone poles were illuminated by the miners' lights, jutting out in all directions from the brown limestone floors, walls, and ceiling. The Cave of the Crystals, as it's appropriately been named, is nestled 950 feet underground. The cavern is located inside Nika Mountain, which is rich in silver, lead, and zinc. Since the mining company Industrias Pinoles discovered the cave, it's been filled with researchers from all over the globe. The scientific mystery and rare beauty of this place are just too incredible for them to pass up. Crystallographer, yes, that's a real thing, Juan Manuel Garcia Ruiz from the University of Granada traveled to the cave all the way from Spain just to see these crystals with his own eyes. He'd been growing crystals in laboratory flasks since he was 15 years old, so walking around the cavern was like a dream come true. He said that when he first entered the cave, he burst out laughing because, in his own words, he was euphoric. In the years since the cave was found, researchers like Garcia Ruiz have braved the cavern's hot and humid conditions in search of answers regarding the crystal's origin. They also hope to discover the reason for their monumental growth. But 2 decades and some change later, many of these mysteries have been solved. So the main focus now is how to protect and preserve this place for future generations. About 26 million years ago, magma funneled upward through the earth underneath southeastern Chihuahua, Mexico. This climbing magma eventually created what's now a mountain that's located near the town of Nika. Simultaneously, the magma forced scorching, mineral-rich waters into gaps and caverns within the mountain's limestone. And it was in these waters that the gypsum crystals were born. Within the cave was water infused with calcium sulfate, which can form several different types of minerals. But it just so happened that gypsum, or more specifically a translucent, colorless type of gypsum called selenite, came to be the main mineral in the caves. I should mention that this cave isn't the only cavern in Nika that's filled with gypsum crystals. However, no other cave in the world could compare to the massive crystals found within the Cave of the Crystals. It seems as though this cavern just happens to be in the Goldilocks zone for growing minerals to monumental proportions. Unfortunately though, if you were planning to pack your bags and travel to Mexico to take a look at this place, I have some bad news. The cave is closed to the public as it's located inside the Nika mine, and it's for researchers only. Xicheng, the Lion City. Now hold your breath because we're going underwater. Hidden beneath the waves in China is the incredible ancient city of Xicheng. The name translates to Lion City, which sounds like a place you might find in a video game. But what does this Chinese city have to do with lions? Well, it was named after the nearby Wuxi Mountain, which means 5 Lion Mountain in English. Looking at pictures of this place, you may find it odd how well preserved everything is. Buildings are intact, and you can see every detail on the motifs that decorate the structures. But it's underwater, so something terrible must have happened here, right? Maybe an earthquake, or perhaps a giant wave washed over this place, submerging it completely. But that's just not the case. In reality, Lion City was purposely flooded by the Chinese government. Lion City is nearly 1,400 years old, so you would assume that China would want to leave this place as untouched as possible, but they did the exact opposite, covering the entire place with water in order to accommodate the Xin'an hydroelectric dam. 300,000 people lived in the city up until 1959, when everyone was forced to move. And they didn't really have a choice. They could either relocate or be swallowed by the Qiandao Lake like the rest of the city. You'd think the sinking of an entire city would make Xicheng well remembered by the people of China, but it was actually mostly forgotten about until 2001, when the Beijing Dragon Diving Club rediscovered the place. In near-perfect condition, members of the club found intricate carvings, arches, guardian lions, as well as full buildings and temples at a depth of about 130 feet. Since it was submerged, it's been protected from rain, wind, and sun damage, but what about water damage? Apparently that wasn't something the Chinese government cared about. Xicheng was constructed during the Tang Dynasty in 621 AD, and based on ancient records of the region's history, the city is quite large. spanning an area that's bigger than 60 football fields. The city was unique, as it was built with 5 gates and towers, as opposed to the typical 4. It contains 265 archways and is surrounded by city walls that date back to the 16th century. If you didn't know anything about Xicheng and visited Qiandao Lake, you'd never even know there's an ancient city concealed within its depths. Although this place is open to the public, there are very few dive operators that run trips to the lake. It's not impossible to visit, it just takes a bit of planning. However, even if you do dive down to Lion City, you're not likely to see much. Visibility is extremely low at 130 feet, dropping to a mere 6 inches in some places towards the bottom of the lagoon. But anyway, if you're a diver and you want to go for it. And then be sure to tell us all about it. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. The legendary Ark of the Covenant is said to be stored in a church in Ethiopia. You know, one of the most sacred religious relics of all time. It's said to be a giant golden chest that supposedly carries the 10 Commandments. But as fate would have it, only a few people are allowed to enter this holy place. Built in the 4th century, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion is located in Aksum, Ethiopia. But this place is harder to get into than a VIP section of a nightclub in Vegas on a Saturday night. Archaeologists and historians are prohibited from investigating the chapel. Guards make sure that nobody enters the building who isn't a member of the church. They're kind of like bouncers, shooing away unwanted guests and curious tourists. But that doesn't really give you an accurate picture of who these guys are. Apparently, these religious bouncers are actually monks. So that changes things a bit, doesn't it? Whether or not the Ark of the Covenant is really inside this church is up for debate. After all, nobody is allowed inside to confirm or deny this other than members of the church. It seems strange that they would keep this ancient relic all to themselves, but it does sort of make sense. Important artifacts like this have a habit of going missing once they are moved for examination. And if they really have what they say they do, you can understand why they don't want everyone looking at it and touching it. For now, only those allowed inside the church know for sure. So, until more evidence is presented to the public, one can only hope they're telling the truth. What do you think? Do you think they have the Ark of the Covenant? Let me know in the comments. The Dome of the Rock. There is a building in Jerusalem that's topped with a golden ball. Well, it's not so much as a ball as it is a gold-plated domed roof. This place is known as the Dome of the Rock, and it's more exclusive and holier than the Temple Mount. On the outside, the building is intricately decorated with vibrant blue and green patterns, so it really stands out against the desert landscape. It's supposedly the oldest surviving work of Islamic architecture, and it contains the earliest proclamations of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Until the mid-20th century, the only people permitted in the area were Muslims. Non-Muslims were given limited access in 1967. However, if you're not Muslim, you aren't permitted to pray, wear religious apparel, or bring prayer books to the site. This is strictly enforced by the Israeli police. It's so hard to get into that a photographer from National Geographic took 2 years of negotiations before they could even set foot on the premises. The location of the Dome of the Rock is believed to be mentioned in the Quran, so it's considered extremely holy by the people of Israel. It's supposedly the place where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. So, while non-Muslims are allowed in the Temple Mount, they aren't allowed to step foot inside the Dome of the Rock. That means that no Christian has ever set foot inside this place and seen the inside with their own eyes. But the inside of the building is arguably the best part. The interior of the building is so amazing that it rivals the Sistine Chapel. Held up by 8 main pillars, the Dome of the Rock is almost entirely covered in complex geometric patterns and complicated mosaics. Every detail is perfectly designed and implemented. Ancient settlements of the Arabian Desert. Looking at the Arabian Desert, you'd never guess that people once lived there, but apparently it was once inhabited by thousands of people. In the middle of what's now the unforgiving Nephut Desert in the Arabian Peninsula lies a secret buried beneath the sands. Recent revelations seem to suggest that this seemingly barren land was once a thriving oasis, teeming with life and lush greenery. Discovered by a research team, evidence of 46 ancient lakes scattered throughout the desert has unveiled a forgotten chapter of human history. For a long time, the Arabian Peninsula was thought to be an inhospitable wasteland and nothing more. But now, researchers have revealed it to be an important hub for early humans making their exodus from Africa. The Paleo Deserts Project, which was launched in 2013, set out on a journey to explore the shifting landscapes of Arabia. They plan to discover its significance in the human story. And what do you think they found? They discovered evidence of a series of Green Arabia events triggered by celestial hiccups. And these so-called hiccups transformed the desert into a tropical paradise, attracting early human settlers. Using satellite imagery and sediment cores, researchers uncovered traces of ancient civilizations along the shores of these dried-out lakes. Ancient tools dating back 1.8 million to 250,000 years ago suggest that intelligent people lived there who could handle changes in the environment. They went deep into the desert. They didn't just inhabit the edges, which is different from what we used to think. I mean, without evidence, who would ever imagine that people were living in this barren wasteland? The routes taken by these ancient migrants remain a mystery, yet evidence suggests two main pathways. One through the Horn of Africa, and another through the Sinai Peninsula. Though no human remains have been unearthed, the sophistication of their stone tools mirrors that of their Eastern African counterparts. As the climate changed between wet and dry periods, the resilience of these ancient people was tested. But how did they survive when faced with hardships? And what secrets lie buried beneath the shifting sands of time? The cyclical nature of Green Arabia hints at a future where the desert blooms once more. However, the impact of modern climate change remains uncertain. In other words, the desert might have been on track to go green again until things started going south.
Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, is a massive natural sandstone rock formation in Australia's Northern Territory. It's difficult to convey how huge this thing is without physically seeing it for yourself, but it stands over 1,140 feet tall and is roughly 6 miles wide. And what's even more amazing is that the sandstone that makes up the rock dates back 600 million years. Uluru has been one of the most sacred sites of the Anangu tribes for thousands of years. The first European who laid eyes on it was William Gosse in 1873, but the Anangu have been visiting Uluru for over 30,000 years. They covered the bottom of the rock in beautiful petroglyphs and paintings. The rock is at the epicenter of stories, songs, and ceremonies that celebrate the creation of life in Australia. And for the indigenous population, Uluru was the center of their universe. To say Uluru is sacred would be an understatement. The Anangu believed the ancestral creator of the universe was directly responsible for putting Uluru on the planet. Each cave and dimple on the rock has a story behind it, and every legend ever told by the Anangu is drawn somewhere on the surface of the stone. But how exactly is this a forbidden place? It's forbidden in the sense that scientists might never learn the truth of the natural monument because nobody is allowed to dig here. Climbing was recently outlawed, so no more hikers will be going to the top of the rock without facing jail time. And nobody will ever put a shovel or a pick in the ground in search of lost artifacts. So don't even think about it. And now for number 9. But first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Irish Bomb Squad and Eric Lencher. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. China's forbidden relics. The Chinese government has officially prohibited certain cultural relics from being exhibited anywhere outside of the country. These are China's forbidden artifacts. The People's Republic of China made a list of antiquities in 2002 that may not, for any reason, be taken abroad. Many artifacts were only recently discovered, most having been found since the middle of the 20th century. And in 2012, the state announced a revision with 37 additional cultural relics forbidden from ever leaving Chinese borders, most of which were old paintings and works of calligraphy. Then, the next year, they had 94 more items added to the list of forbidden objects. These items were excavated at multiple archaeological sites in no particular order. Not only does China have very specific treasures they refuse to allow to leave, but there is also a whole heap of classified artifacts that can't leave either. Anything classified as ancient human remains must never leave China. Anything taken from a place of religious observation, as well as artifacts that could easily be damaged, are also forbidden from leaving. And cultural relics too, which essentially means every single thing dug out of the ground. Additionally, nothing is allowed to be exhibited anywhere outside China if it hasn't first been exhibited inside the country itself. On the original list in 2002 were some very exciting pieces of Chinese history, including an ancient cauldron from the 23rd year of King Kang of Zhou's reign during the Zhou dynasty, which was between 1046 and 771 BC. Also included on the list were the 4 phoenix crowns taken from the tomb of the Wanli Emperor of the Ming Dynasty from 1368 to 1644. One of the most controversial artifacts, however, is the Xi'an stele. This is an ancient monument from the Tang Dynasty, inscribed with the detailed history of the first 150 years of Christianity in China. The monument is almost 10 feet tall, inscribed in Chinese and Syriac. It talks about how Emperor Taizong accepted Christianity into his lands to form the Church of the East. Missionaries arrived in China from the Eastern Roman Empire in 635 AD. They then began to spread Christianity through China, and it was working. China almost became a Christian nation just like Rome. And if it hadn't been for the religious persecution of the 9th century, it may have flourished. But Emperor Wuzhong forbade all religion from outside nations, and so Christianity was stopped. So too was Zoroastrianism, which had been seeping into China from Persia. Pompeii's Forbidden Room. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it buried the Roman city of Pompeii in hot ash. One of the few surviving witnesses said they watched dust pour over the land like a black flood. Countless people died, and Pompeii was subsequently abandoned. But it was rediscovered in 1748, and ever since, it's been one of the most popular archaeological sites in the world. Since Pompeii is studied on a regular basis, there are always new things being found. And in 2021, archaeologists discovered a forbidden room. They were searching through a preserved villa on the outskirts of Pompeii. It was technically part of the city, but way out on the fringe. There, the researchers found a trio of wooden beds, a chamber pot, and some jars. But the big discovery was who lived in the room. And according to Italy's culture minister Dario Franceschini, it was slaves. This is an example of Rome's darker side. They may have built roads and brought peace to many places, but they also brought about devastation and owned people like cattle. Whoever owned the ancient villa on the outskirts of this city also had slaves. And on one of their beds, a wooden chest with some scraps of metal and fiber was discovered. Interestingly, it may have been part of a horse harness. This suggests that the slaves were tasked with caring for the stables. 2 of the beds in the room were adult-sized and the other was clearly for a child. And because of this, scientists say it must have been a family, and that the room doubled as a storage space. In other words, the slaves slept on small beds in a storage closet, as the space is only 172 square feet. The discovery of the Forbidden Room is shedding light on how the Roman Empire treated slaves. Historians have long known about the practice, but the facts are vague when it comes to their everyday lives. What they did, where they lived, and how they were treated are still questions that have yet to be answered. The Forbidden Zone. If you've ever checked out the Grand Canyon on Google Maps, you may have noticed how many of the landmarks have weird names. Many of the high points around the haunted canyon area have names like the Tower of Set, the Horus Temples, and the pyramids of Cheops and Ra, all of which are Egyptian names. And if you have ever tried to figure out why so many landmarks in the Grand Canyon have Egyptian names, you may have come up empty. That's because there is very little information on who named these points after famous figures from Egyptian mythology. History tells us the first government-funded journey into the Grand Canyon was in 1869. General John Wesley Powell ran the expedition, and he happened to be the original director of the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology. He was also a founding member of the National Geographic Society. Legend has it that John's notes on his voyage were lost, although many think it was him who named the peaks in the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is home to a forbidden zone. It's prohibited to travel in the area around where everything is named after Egyptian figures. Officially, the geographical areas and roads are closed to public use, and the whole forbidden zone stretches about 62 miles. It might be interesting to know that airplanes are also prohibited from flying over the forbidden zone. This legislation was passed in 1987, restricting the airspace over the canyon. The question is, what are they hiding down there? There were rumors in the early 1900s that an expedition discovered Egyptian relics stashed in a cave somewhere in the canyon. An explorer by the name of G.E. Kincaid believed there was an Egyptian society living in the shadows of the canyon centuries ago, sheltered in caves, but the alleged discovery was quickly dismissed. And all these years later, it's illegal to even try and enter the area. The Castle in the Sand. Arg-e-Bam is a broken citadel in the center of the Middle Eastern desert. It began as a small settlement during the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BC. It was home to military barracks, royal palaces, and a community filled with people from every walk of life. It wasn't merely a fortress, but also a trading post and a political hub. And during the medieval days, the Castle in the Sand became the epicenter for economic supremacy in Persia. Arg-e-Bam really hit its stride in the 7th century AD, 1,000 years after it had already been thriving in the desert. The city was continuously built upon with new additions, neighborhoods, and new pieces of the great citadel in the center. As one empire fell and another rose, the city in the sand maintained its importance. However, the Sasanian Empire took control in 224 AD, and over the next 400 years, they made Arg-e-Bam one of the wealthiest places in the Middle East. Even when the great city of Persepolis, built by King Darius I, fell into ruin, Arg-e-Bam remained standing. Much of its success was due to its hydraulic water system. Seeing as the region is dry as a bone, engineers 3,000 years ago came up with a way to irrigate the entire place. They tapped into the underground water and brought it to the surface using wells, channels, shafts, and hydraulics. The water system irrigated crops and turned what should have been a forsaken wasteland into a beautiful utopia. Situated halfway between China and the Roman Empire, the Castle in the Sand was perfectly placed to make money off the Silk Road. And during the early Middle Ages, trade flowed through Arg-e-Bam like a river. The city was full of powerful people, complex politics, and wealth beyond measure. And some of the most important trading items were silk and cotton. But what happened? Unlike most powerful cities from ancient times, Arg-e-Bam survived into the modern age. It wasn't until around 1900 that people started to leave. Then, in 2003, an earthquake destroyed the city. This natural disaster essentially turned Arg-e-Bam into a ruin within seconds. The city may have stood for another 2,700 years if it hadn't been for Mother Nature. It then became a forbidden ruin and has only partially been restored as a tourist attraction. Drones, bombs, and the Plain of Jars. One of the most baffling archaeological sites in the world is also completely off-limits. The Plain of Jars in Laos is a vast landscape of giant stone jars stuck in meadows and jutting out from the sides of grassy knolls. In total, there are over 2,000 stone jars spread throughout the area. Scientists think they have been there for more than 2 millennia. The general consensus among archaeologists is that the jars were used as humongous funeral urns. They were shaped by an unknown civilization and were used to hold the bodies of the deceased. People were either burned and their ashes were placed in the jars, or they were stuffed inside and left to rot. At least that's one theory. Finding out the truth is a lot more difficult than it should be. The Plain of Jars is a forbidden zone. It was bombed so brutally by the US during the Vietnam War that it's still too dangerous to walk around. Around 2 million bombs were dropped on Laos between 1964 and 1973. Laos was targeted even more than Vietnam was during the war, and about 30% of the bombs that were dropped on the country never exploded. Over the past 50 years, they've been sucked into the ground or grown over by bushes and grass. So, one wrong step here, and you can be blown to smithereens. Scientists have resorted to using drones to study the Plain of Jars. It's too dangerous to be there in person, so archaeologists are sending in drones to do their work. But for all the drones being flown over the area, scientists still don't know who made the jars or what they were used for. What do you think? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. The Red Zone. The Red Zone is a living piece of war history. In 1916, French and German forces battled for 300 long days. It was the longest sustained conflict of the war and cost over 300,000 lives. The Battle of Verdun is still believed to be the bloodiest fight in the First World War. And after 300 days of battle, the town of Verdun was reduced to rubble. The surrounding region in northeastern France was also destroyed, leaving 42,000 acres looking like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. In the days after the war, it was agreed to leave the zone as it was. It then became known as Zone Rouge in France, which in English means red zone. Over a century later, there isn't a single human who lives here. It's also forbidden, with access rarely granted and only in very special cases. British historian Christina Holstein says that before World War I, Verdun was mostly farmland, but it was also home to a peacetime garrison of 66,000 men. War started in 1914, and within 2 years, French and German forces had built up munitions in the area. Millions of bullets helped Verdun play host to the first true artillery battle of the modern age. And for 300 days, the shelling didn't stop. Millions upon millions of artillery shells blew the land apart, and now Verdun is filled with craters and looks more like the moon than planet Earth. The Forbidden Coast. Miners in Namibia came across the ruins of a Portuguese ship filled with gold coins. The ship contained a treasure estimated to be worth roughly $9 million. After the miners made the initial discovery, archaeologists showed up to handle the rest, and they soon identified the ship as the Bom Jesus, which translates to Good Jesus in English. The ship set sail for India from the city of Lisbon in 1533, but it vanished while passing through a Namibian diamond town. Its route took the ship along what's known as the Forbidden Coast, which earned its name for good reason. Dozens, even hundreds of ships have met their end here, and when the wreckage of the vessel was finally found 500 years later, it was at the bottom of a drained lagoon. It had been sucked into the shore and buried under tons of sand. If the miners hadn't been there digging, the ship would have never been revealed. Professor Timothy Insall, an expert in African archaeology, called the discovery significant. Archaeologists discovered artifacts and clothing in the ship, as well as pieces of bone and random navigational tools. And even though the gold was what made headlines, scholars are far more interested in the other artifacts. It's extremely rare to find personal belongings of a ship's crew from 500 years ago. They think the bones could offer insight into what the sailors were eating at the peak of Portuguese exploration. Experts believe it was likely a storm responsible for the destruction of the ship. Winds along the Forbidden Coast can reach up to 80 miles an hour in the winter. The surf is incredible, but getting to shore is nearly impossible. Even if the ship capsized and some men escaped, they would have been extraordinarily lucky to wash up alive. The Bom Jesus is currently the oldest and most valuable shipwreck ever found along the Forbidden Coast. But it's not the only one. There are hundreds of boats buried along the sandy coastline of one of the world's most dangerous shores. And sadly, most of them will never be found. The Forbidden Bowl. A farmer in Bolivia was working on a private estate in 1960 when he accidentally discovered a bull. The bull was obviously a historic relic. It was ancient, fragile, and covered in inscriptions. It was found in a relatively untouched area where archaeologists have never been able to do any digging. And it may not have gotten much attention if not for one impossible fact. The bull is adorned with Sumerian cuneiform script. Cuneiform script is the oldest known written language in the world. It was invented by the Sumerians of Mesopotamia around 5,500 years ago. While scientists have never been able to authenticate the writing as Sumerian, that's what it appears to be. The inside of the bowl is inscribed with carvings that look identical to Mesopotamian characters. Another part of the bowl has inscriptions written in the ancient Khalkha language of the Andean locals. This language was likely invented around 1000 AD by the Pucara civilization, who came before the well-known Tiwanaku Empire. Bolivian archaeologist Max Portugal Zamora learned of the Forbidden Bull in 1960, but he never got to do any good research on it. The bull was handed over to the local museum in La Paz, and in exchange, the farmer who found it received a land grant. Nobody cared much about the bull, which came to be known as the Fuente Magna Bull, until the early 2000s. This was when legend of the artifact began to circulate again, and modern archaeologists took an interest. American epigraphist Clyde Ahmed Winters even released a translation of the bull, and according to him, it says, "In the future approach the immense Nia, a blessed person with great protection. The Divine One will instill purity, joy, and character. This beneficial oracle is for individuals who wish to create a strong character, happiness, and purity for everyone who seeks it." What the translation means is hard to say. Not all the experts are convinced, and some think Winters made the whole thing up. Nia is the Sumerian fertility goddess who birthed the sky and the earth. But there is no possible way a remote Andean tribe in South America could have known that. The bull is still an unsolved mystery to this day. Some scholars think it could prove the Sumerians took their boats across the ocean to South America 5,000 years ago. And if that's true, it would mean the Sumerians might be the ancestors of the Inca. But what do you think is the truth in this case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The secret excavation. Jerusalem is occasionally excavated, but it doesn't happen often. And it certainly doesn't happen in very holy places. But there is always some kind of archaeological activity happening. In 1909, a group of rebel scientists completed a forbidden dig in Jerusalem in search of the Ark of the Covenant. In the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire still ruled Jerusalem. The holy city was under Islamic control from their capital in Istanbul. A Scandinavian scholar named Walter Juvelius believed the Ark of the Covenant was somewhere in a lost tunnel underneath the city of Jerusalem. So he convinced Captain Montague Brownlow Parker to fund an expedition, and they set off on the hunt. The Ark of the Covenant, according to the Bible, is a wooden chest adorned with 2 statues of cherubim. Beneath the solid gold lid are the tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments, and some other legendary religious relics. But after the Babylonian army attacked Jerusalem in 586 BC, the Ark was lost. Some say it was stashed underneath the Temple Mount, while others think it was taken back to Babylon. Juvelius believed the first of these 2 theories, and more specifically, he thought it was buried beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa is the 3rd holiest place in all of Islam, and for that reason, excavations here are strictly prohibited. Even in 1909, it was illegal to do any digging. But the expedition believed if they dug from the bottom of the hill up toward the mosque, they would find secret passages from 3,000 years ago. And they thought the Ark was somewhere within these tunnels. Unfortunately, though, the scientists never did find the Ark of the Covenant. But they did bribe everyone in their way to allow them to complete the most forbidden excavation in archaeological history. Parker and Juvelius created such a fuss that when locals found out what they were doing, they started a riot. Newspapers printed headlines saying the archaeologists may have just provoked a worldwide holy war. And then, months later, Italy went to war with the Ottoman Empire.
The Shiva Lingas. India's Karnataka state is home to a riverbed that may have once been used as a nuclear reactor. There are over 1,000 mysterious features known as lingas carved onto the rocks at the bottom of the river that look weirdly like power nodules. This is not a famous place, although I really think it should be. The river Shalmala is sacred to those who live in the area, but outside the state, most people have never heard of it. When the water level drops and the river starts to run dry, the lingas appear. But what are they, and what do they mean? And why are they also at a mysterious site in Cambodia? In 1969, Jean Balbé became the first outsider to study the lingas. But the Cambodian Civil War broke out, and nobody was able to safely return for another 20 years. Historians now believe the lingas were carved under the leadership of Sadashiva Raya, the king of the kingdom during the 16th century. You might be wondering what a linga even is, so let me explain. In Sanskrit, linga means mark. The Shiva Linga is a mark associated with Shiva, the Hindu god. Lingas are all over India in temples and sacred buildings. It's been said that lingas are endowed with Shiva's power and can help concentrate your mind if you meditate near lingas. Lingas have also been interpreted as tiny atomic reactors. They even look sort of like modern nuclear reactors from the outside. What's more, lingas are frequently exposed to water. At temples, lingas have water poured over them on a regular basis by visitors and monks. The lingas and the river Shalmala are always covered with water except during the dry season. Nuclear reactors need water too, don't they? Reactors require water to keep them from exploding. Another weird fact is that the most important Shiva temples in the country, which all boast Shiva Lingas, are in a perfect straight line from one town to another. Then there's the atomic angle with Lord Shiva himself, who was said to have the destructive capability to destroy the world in a fiery blast. There are even examples of Shiva supposedly blowing up the world in old Hindu texts, suggesting there could have been nuclear war in the past. As far as scientists can tell, lingas are only made from stone. They don't contain any components that could link them to nuclear reactors. If they were used to channel energy and create explosions on a nuclear level, it was done with a technology or a power that us modern humans have no idea about. The people from the sky. In India, there are a set of enormous footprints which local folklore suggests as evidence of ancient godlike beings falling from the sky. They didn't fall quite as much as they landed gracefully, judging by the footprints. Yet the speculation arises, could this really be proof of extraterrestrial visitors? The origins and age of these footprints remain shrouded in mystery. In 2013, geologist Nitish Priyadarshi initiated an investigation to determine if the legends are telling the truth. What he found is that the footprints appear to have been carved into the rock on purpose. He believes they weren't really left as fossils millions of years ago from someone's actual foot, rather an unknown person carved them, and they carved something else too. Near the ancient footprints is an engraving of what looks like a flying saucer. Nitish said the flying object is on the same piece of rock as the footprints. He thinks they may have been engraved as a way to commemorate the arrival of gods from the heavens. Gods who came down from vehicles so strange the ancient people didn't understand what they were. If you've been watching the channel a lot, you've heard me talk about Vimanas before. In ancient Indian texts, folklore, and artwork, Vimanas were depicted as flying temples used by the gods. But many believe they were more than just fairy tales. Vimanas could have been real ships used by humanoid-like gods to travel the cosmos. Take a look at some pictures of Vimanas and let me know if you think they could be ancient interpretations of spaceships. It's not as if people thousands of years ago had a lot of sci-fi movies to get their ideas from. When they saw a spaceship, they thought it was a flying temple or a flying city. The object etched beside the giant footprints is likely a Vimana. Let's leave the strange footprints in India alone for a bit and travel across the world to the United States of America. In 1925, a very similar footprint was discovered. James Higgins came across a footprint that was 8 feet long at Busy Peak. The next year, newspapers in Oakland reported that Professor George Lauterbach at the University of California found even more giant footprints in San Jose. Only these ones were a bit smaller, only about 5 feet long. What kind of creatures were walking across the US with feet that big? They must have been actual giants, people who stood more than 20 feet tall. Other examples of giant footprints have been found preserved in rock near Mpuluzi, near the Swaziland border in South Africa. Then there are the footprints Nitish recently investigated in India. All these discoveries make it hard to refute that something weird was happening in this world before modern history, and it seems to have involved giants and spaceships. Ancient astronauts in southern Africa. Recently, a new study by mainstream scientists has lent its support to the theory that ancient astronauts visited every last corner of the planet. The mainstream scientists didn't do this on purpose. They rarely try to support alien theories. However, it seems science and fringe science are starting to become dangerously similar. Researchers at the University of Leeds discovered how to unlock the potential of gold atoms. They used layers of gold only 2 atoms thick to make incredibly efficient catalysts. It's the newest form of gold made in a lab, with implications that could change how technology is created going forward. Each new slab of gold is 0.47 nanometers thick. Take a look at your fingernail for a second. This new gold is 1 million times thinner than your nail. This is a big deal because extremely thin gold is necessary for electronics and medical devices. As technology gets smaller, gold needs to get smaller too. Yet experts found something they had not expected when they created the thin sheets. The thin structure is 10 times more efficient than normal gold nanoparticles. Great, but what does this have to do with ancient astronauts? Almost all the big theories surrounding aliens on planet Earth revolve around gold. The Anunnaki gods of ancient Sumer came from a distant planet to mine for gold. Just like the early gold miners of the American West, the Anunnaki supposedly came seeking riches. Being an incredibly advanced society, they had no need for silly little pickaxes. They found primitive Homo sapiens dwelling in caves, teetering on extinction. The Anunnaki gifted our 8-brained ancestors with intelligence and dexterity. Then the newly created humans were put to work in the mines. The Anunnaki supposedly needed gold from Earth to continue making technological advances on their own planet, because, just like human beings today, the Anunnaki were burning through their natural reserves. So where did all this gold mining happen? Primarily in Africa, and long before the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia. Long before, as in hundreds of thousands of years earlier. The story goes it was only when the Anunnaki had finished with their human slaves that they tried to get rid of everyone using a giant flood. The few humans who survived went on to start civilization in Mesopotamia. They told stories of their cruel alien overlords, which they assumed were gods. These stories were copied time and time again, ultimately making it into the Bible. So, on the one hand, you have the fact that scientists just created the world's thinnest gold, and it is 2 atoms thick. Then you have the story of the Anunnaki. Now, get ready because it's about to get crazy when these things come together. According to a fresh new study on the origin of humanity, scientists were able to trace all humans to Botswana in southern Africa. Researchers looked at over 1,200 samples of mitochondrial DNA from local Africans. The DNA proved that Homo sapiens were living in southern Africa in an isolated colony 200,000 years ago. So, ancient astronaut theorists are asking, could this have been the site of the Anunnaki gold mine? Secrets in Utah. The Great Gallery in southern Utah is one of America's greatest rock art panels. It's covered in amazing pictures of unusual anthropomorphic figures. Nobody really knows the purpose of the paintings. If you do, be sure to let me know because nobody else does. The figures in the paintings seem to be human in nature, though they could easily be representations of gods or even monsters. The ancient painters also made images of birds, snakes, and spirits. Trying to date the Great Gallery has proven incredibly difficult. Scientists still don't know when the pictographs were made, but figure it was at least 10,000 years ago. The pictographs were likely created by a mysterious civilization known only as the Desert Archaic culture. They thrived in Utah from 8000 BC until 500 AD. What happened to them is unknown. The reason I'm telling you about the Great Gallery is that ancient astronaut theorists believe the figures to be aliens. Also, the Great Gallery isn't particularly far from where the Utah monolith was discovered on November 18, 2020. 2020 was the weirdest year since the fall of the Berlin Wall. As the pandemic slowly spread across the world, weird metal monoliths showed up in random places. The monolith in Utah was found by the Department of Public Safety as they conducted a count of bighorn sheep. Fans of Stanley Kubrick films immediately noticed the similarity between the structure in Utah and the weird monolith in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. I don't want to give anyone PTSD by talking about 2020, so I'll get straight to the point. Nobody ever figured out what the monolith was. More monoliths showed up in Romania, California, and Turkey, though some of these were obvious hoaxes. Looking through old satellite data, it was confirmed that the metallic monolith was installed between summer 2015 and autumn 2016. Once word got out that it was there, it disappeared. The prevailing theory today is that the monolith was an art installation, though nobody knows who put it there. There may not be a connection between the monolith and the ancient pictographs depicting what are potentially aliens. Or maybe there is something about the Utah desert that attracts extraterrestrial visitors. What do you think? Electromagnetic anomalies. If you've ever taken a trip to Mexico City, you have most likely visited Teotihuacan. A short drive from downtown Mexico, Teotihuacan is one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world. It has pyramids that rival those in Egypt. 100,000 people once lived in its structures. It also had causeways and canals and walls made entirely of human skulls. But was Teotihuacan a city of men or of gods? Even the Aztec didn't know who built Teotihuacan. When they stumbled upon its ruins 1,800 years after it was abandoned, the Aztec thought it was a city built by giants or by their creator gods. There are a few different Aztec origin stories. One of them is surprisingly similar to the origin story told by the Sumerians. The Aztecs said the gods landed on Earth in a mysterious vessel shaped like a giant flint knife. It was shaped like Oumuamua, the interstellar object that recently passed near Earth and was maybe a spaceship. The gods poured from the vessel and made the Aztecs to honor and serve them. Perhaps it was another mining operation, this time in Mexico. When Teotihuacan was first excavated in the late 19th century, the pyramids were covered in a huge layer of dirt. Archaeologist Leopoldo Baltres was shocked because it made no sense where all the dirt came from. One theory is that the pyramids have been standing since before the biblical flood. It was the flood that caused them to be covered in so much dirt. There are more recent discoveries that are equally as baffling. For example, researcher Marco Vigato found that some of the pyramid stones are 10 tons. They were also made from volcanic rock called andesite, which would have been theoretically impossible to cut with stone tools. In 2015, after 12 long years of investigation, a pool of liquid mercury was discovered underneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Did you know that mercury is an amazing conductor of electricity and used in many electrical components, such as batteries? The liquid mercury must have been extracted and processed, then poured into the mysterious chamber beneath the temple. Many have suggested there are pools of liquid mercury underneath the Egyptian pyramids too. There are rivers of liquid mercury in the tomb of the first emperor of China. So the ancient people definitely had an obsession with mercury around the world. I don't know exactly what the people of Teotihuacan were doing with an underground reservoir of mercury, but it must have been intense. While excavating beneath the temple, archaeologists also found hundreds of small gold spheres and sheets of mica. Put together these three materials and you have the ingredients for a gigantic battery protected by heat shields. Some have suggested that Teotihuacan was a giant microchip, or that it was a spaceport for Anunnaki vehicles to recharge before the return journey back to their planet, with their cargo full of Earth's precious gold. The fact the builders of Teotihuacan disappeared without a trace only makes the mystery that much more enticing. Aliens on Mars. One of my favorite theories for the origin of humanity is that humans came from Mars. I know they say that only men from Mars and women are from Venus, but it might just be both. The theory goes like this. There was a great civilization on the red planet millions of years ago when Mars was lush, green, and covered in oceans. Then there was a calamity and a small handful of people managed to escape on a ship to Earth. But over thousands of years, they lost their knowledge of their Martian homeworld and grew more primitive. It's a fun theory, but what about physical proof? Mars is a sad remnant of what it once was. The water is gone and there isn't a life form to be seen. Yet what if there are ruins that have survived in the arid landscape? And what if NASA is lying about it? Alien enthusiast and conspiracy supporter Scott C. Waring recently said he found proof of human structures on Mars. While looking at photographs taken of the red planet by NASA, Scott noticed what looks like a broken sculpture. The sculpture appears to have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. You know, all the typical things you expect from a human sculpture. But it also has what appears to be a crown on the top of its head. Could this have been a former Martian king? Why don't you take a look at these photos and let me know in the comments if you think the sculpture is legit or if it's just a boring rock. Scott claims the sculpture looks similar to the ones on Easter Island. What's your verdict? The aliens of Sanxingdui. One of the most controversial archaeological sites in the world is a place called Sanxingdui in China. Some say the ancient site was home to a culture that worshipped aliens. Others, specifically Chinese archaeologists who work at the site, have called the alien theory completely unfounded. To understand the strangeness of this ancient place, I need to go back to its discovery in 1929. The ruins of a great metropolis were found in China's Sichuan province. Archaeologists dated the city to the Bronze Age, about 3,000 years ago. It's been nearly a century now, and archaeologists are still flummoxed. They don't know who built the city. They know very little about the nameless culture and can only guess their traditions and habits based on the artifacts discovered. When it comes to artifacts, thousands have been discovered. The most interesting relics are dozens of little figurines that look like aliens. We don't always want to jump on the alien bandwagon, but look at these things and tell me I'm wrong. Archaeologists call them statuettes. Each one has extraordinarily exaggerated features, such as big eyes, a huge head, and weirdly small limbs. It's been theorized that the mysterious culture was visited by aliens thousands of years ago and designed the figurines, or the statuettes, to look like their starry-eyed visitors. Lei Yu from the Sichuan Provincial Cultural Relics and Archaeology Research Institute is not happy about the theories. He explained that the statuettes are likely meant to depict gods and goddesses, not alien overlords. It might be impossible to end the controversy at Sanxingdui. There are no written records in the city. Archaeologists haven't found a single text or any example of the written word. This is a little unusual because there were lots of civilizations far older that had complex writing systems. One possible explanation is that the Sanxingdui culture did have a writing system, but they wrote everything on fabrics. Over the last 3,000 years, those fabrics have decayed, leaving no trace of the language behind. Either that, or maybe the alien visitors gifted them with the ability to read each other's minds. Sodom and the Space Invaders. In the book of Genesis, God destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah using fire and brimstone. According to a Soviet scientist, the Bible is wrong. Sodom and Gomorrah weren't destroyed by God. They were destroyed by a nuclear blast. Who would want to set off an atomic bomb in 2 seemingly unimportant cities in Bronze Age Jordan? Soviet scientist Dr. M. Agrest speculated it was invaders from space. The incredible claim has added even more controversy to a pair of cities that have been controversial since the Bible. Sodom and Gomorrah were the cities of sin and debauchery 3,650 years ago. The Bible says that Lot, a good and holy man, was the only righteous one in all of Sodom. Long story short, God was abhorred by what he saw happening in the city's streets and dark corners. It was like Las Vegas in the 70s, but even worse and more disturbing. Lot and his family were allowed to leave the city before God sent his righteous fire to destroy it. As they left, God warned Lot and his family not to turn around. If they did, God assured them that they would be destroyed. Lot's wife didn't listen. She turned to look as God smote Sodom, and in a flash, she was turned into a pillar of salt. M. Agrest argued that Lot's wife was turned into a pillar because she got caught in an atomic blast. He also said that aliens landed at the Baalbek Terrace, a mysterious slab of stone high up in the Syrian mountains. From there, the aliens launched their atomic bombs at the biblical cities in the Jordan Valley. You might be thinking the story sounds like the ravings of a mad Soviet scientist. You could be right, or maybe not. The weird thing is that I'm about to show you proof that Sodom was destroyed by an epic blast. Archaeologists recently confirmed that Sodom was wiped out by a devastating explosion. The explosion was 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Just try to envision the sheer destructive power of such a device. Only this was no device. It was a space rock. Scientists found evidence in Tal el-Hammam that it was hit by an exploding comet in 1650 BC. Tal el-Hammam is the Jordanian city that experts believe inspired the story of Sodom's destruction. At the time the disaster occurred, Tal el-Hammam was the biggest of 3 large cities in the Jordan Valley. It was the main center for politics and religion. Researcher Ariella Marsden said the trio of cities had an impressive population of about 50,000 people combined. These were big, developed cities with mud brick apartments up to 5 stories tall. Archaeologists investigating the ruins have found evidence of a sudden event that scorched the buildings. They have uncovered things like pottery pieces that were melted by heat so intense it caused rock to liquefy. In most cases like this, archaeologists turn to natural disasters for an explanation. Yet there's never been any trace of volcanic eruption, earthquake, or fire in Tal el-Hammam. All the signs point to something like an atomic blast hitting the city, causing temperatures to suddenly spike to 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. To be clear, that's the air temperature I'm talking about. Most people have a hard enough time dealing with 100 degrees. Do you have any idea of what happens when the air suddenly superheats like that? If you were wearing clothes, they would have burst into flames. Wooden structures would have immediately caught fire. Swords and spears instantly disintegrated. Mud bricks and pottery did as well. Within a split second, the whole city was on fire. And don't forget the shockwave that hit the city at 740 miles per hour, worse than any tornado ever recorded. In the aftermath, not a single person survived. Their bodies were so effectively destroyed that they were disintegrated as if hit with a mega particle beam. Bones were exploded into tiny fragments. Scientists think this was all because a comet exploded 2.5 miles above the city. But do you think it could have been an ancient atomic bomb dropped by some extremely rude aliens? Let me know in the comments below. The Inner Earth Civilization. In the 17th century, renowned scientist Edmund Halley came up with an extraordinary idea. He suggested, out loud to the entire world, that the planet Earth is hollow. Within the hollow chambers of the planet are incredible life forms that would shock humanity. Life forms such as our great friends King Kong and Godzilla, who, as everybody knows, live in the hollow Earth. In the years following Halley's claim, scientists refuted and contradicted his speculations, but the idea is still going strong today. In 2015, David Wilcock claimed there are indeed intelligent life forms inside the planet. He claimed that there are entire civilizations deep inside the planet, and they are gearing up for war against the surface. As if the 2020s couldn't get any worse, the world is about to follow a pandemic with a war against a subterranean civilization. But who is David Wilcock anyway, and why are people listening to him? David is not necessarily an authority on science or history. He is a New York Times best-selling author who's made a career of shouting outrageous claims from the rooftops. David has said that throughout the history of the world, multiple advanced civilizations have retreated underground. He used the Atlanteans as an example. When there was a calamity on the surface, the Atlanteans escaped into the Hollow Earth to continue their civilization. They apparently like the underground habitat better, though it's hard to see why. They don't even have stars down there, and presumably no sunlight. Don't be alarmed though, David has a solution for the lack of sunlight. He said there are special kinds of bacteria that give off natural light. As for how you might take a trip into the Hollow Earth yourself, nobody knows where the supposed entrance is. Not even David. He said NASA knows about the existence of hollow planets, and the government has been in contact with the civilizations beneath our feet. But for right now, the entrance remains a secret. Terraforming the Amazon. There is something strange about the Amazon jungle. The strangeness involves a phenomenon known as Amazonian dark earth, also sometimes called black gold or terra preta. Dark earth has been found in patches all across the Amazon. It's a layer of dark black soil up to 13 feet thick in some places. Dark earth is incredibly different from the surrounding soil because of its fertility. Dark earth is the best soil you can imagine. It's so good and healthy for plants that every backyard gardener would chop off a finger or two just to get a bag of this stuff. Scientists say it's rich in nutrients and decaying organic matter. The Amazonian black gold is packed full of phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. Most of the soil in the rainforest is kind of sandy and thin, yet it's 100% natural, accumulated in the jungle over tens of thousands of years. What makes the dark earth so interesting is that it isn't natural. The thick patches of fertile soil were created by someone or something. Mainstream scientists say it was likely ancient humans. Others think this soil may have been part of an ancient geoengineering project, a project designed to terraform Earth, making the planet habitable for the human race. Once again, I'm telling you about the Anunnaki and their mining operations. They were pretty much everywhere. They would have presumably had technology to terraform the world, making it more comfortable for their slave workers. Although why they would want to make it more comfortable for their slaves, I have no idea. In 2024, scientists discovered a lost garden city deep in the rainforest of Ecuador. The city is roughly 2,000 years old, located deep inside a jungle we used to think was only occupied by primitive tribes. This obviously was not the case. The newly discovered garden city was just as advanced as any city built by the Maya or the Aztec 500 years ago. An unknown civilization built this city and filled it with plazas, ceremonial platforms, complex streets, and everything else you would expect of a grand city. It was likely part of a wider kingdom of Amazonians. Scientists have suggested that far more people could have lived in the Amazon than in somewhere like central Mexico, and it was all because of the fertile dark earth. The Garden City is the newest discovery proving the Amazon was home to a vast empire. But there have been other weird discoveries recently as well. In 2017, scientists proved domesticated trees are 5 times more likely to be dominant in the Amazon than non-domesticated trees. This means that many of the trees in the Amazon were cultivated by human hands. But where did the dark earth come from? Was it made by the mysterious civilization that lived in the jungle? Or is the special soil left over from a great gardening project conducted by extraterrestrials? Also, what happened to the Amazonian Empire? This is the big question that everyone would love to see answered. I think it would be awesome to find out how an empire that rivaled the Mayans thousands of miles to the north suddenly disappeared without a trace. And before you ask, it didn't have anything to do with the Spanish conquistadors. The civilization of the Amazon was long gone when the Spanish arrived in South America. The Moon Pyramid. We've already investigated a mysterious statue on Mars today that could be evidence of a lost Martian society. Now it's time to look at a pyramid that has been spotted on the moon and could be evidence of a lunar society. The mysterious pyramid was spotted in satellite images released by NASA. YouTuber Pachito Dominique was the one to announce the discovery. Then our old familiar friend, Mr. Scott C. Waring, showed up to share his opinions. Scott said the pyramid is convincing evidence of intelligent life on the moon. If there is life on the moon, wouldn't you be able to look at it yourself using a telescope in your backyard? And wouldn't it be easy to go back and forth to visit? The moon is close enough to see clearly with the naked eye. If there were little green men bustling about in lunar cities, someone would have snapped photos by now. The pyramid in the satellite images is weirdly convincing. It's positioned in the center of a huge crater, three-sided with what looks like a long dark window on one side. It could be a shadow, it could be a pyramid, or it could be a pyramid-shaped lunar rock. Nobody knows for sure, though Scott says that he's convinced the satellite images prove that it was aliens from the moon who built the Egyptian pyramids. The Atacama Giant. The Atacama Giant kind of looks like a child's doodle of a giant monster. It's a geoglyph carved into the side of a hill in Chile in South America. The giant is the biggest geoglyph on the planet that represents a humanoid figure at 390 feet long. Although it's not alone, surrounded by smaller geometric figures, it is the giant that attracts people to this mysterious and controversial site. Nobody knows who carved the geoglyph. The giant piece of artwork is in the middle of the Atacama Desert, a place where other seriously weird things have been discovered. It was in this desert where scientists found the Atacama skeleton, a 6-foot-long mummy. The skeleton is said to be a human fetus, though others suspect it's a dead alien. The official explanation for the Atacama Giant is that it was made by the indigenous inhabitants of the area around 1100 years ago. It's supposed to be a representation of a shaman, known in the local language as a yatiri. Shamans of the Atacama Desert invoked the power of the spirits and made predictions of the future. They also practiced healing, making them the only real doctors around. Another possibility is that the giant is a depiction of the Andean god Tunupa Tarapaca. He was the central deity of the Aymara people, lord of thunder and lightning, worshipped by many small societies across South America. Regardless of who the giant is meant to be, scientists are still baffled that it was made in the first place. The reason behind its creation is also lost to history. One popular theory is that the desert culture created the geoglyph of their god as a kind of warning, making it huge so that visitors in the sky would see it and think twice about touching down.
Lost city of Kibira. Anatolia in Turkey was a hotbed for early civilizations, long before the rise of the Roman Empire and the spread of Christianity. It was a crossroad of power, being fought over by everyone from the ancient Hittites to the Greeks. And so it should come as no surprise that in the jagged mountains of Anatolia there are lost cities just waiting to be found. One of the most incredible cities uncovered is Kibira. The shattered ruins of the city can be found near the modern town of Golizar. Its history goes back over 2,000 years. Founded as a small settlement by Lydian settlers out of Europe, the people here originally moved twice before finally settling on the best location for Kibira around the 3rd century BC. They had first built their cities on flat land, but found living up in the hills gave them a better view of the pastures in the west. They also had a much better vantage of the powerful Akdag Mountains in the distance. This made the city easier to defend and allowed for the civilization to truly prosper. As the years went by, the great city evolved. Ancient historian Strabo wrote of the complex laws that the city had, meaning they must have had an advanced justice system. They became politically strong and economically prosperous. But times were changing. Roman general Lucius Licinius Murena utterly decimated the city during the First Mithridatic War in 84 BC. With the rise of the Romans, no city was able to govern itself. Many people died and many fled. Then, in 23 AD, an earthquake caused the remainder of the city to collapse on itself, leading it to be abandoned. And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time. I want to say a big thank you to Angela Hernandez and Matt Moorman for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing lost places. Morongo Uta. Rapa Iti is a mountainous island located in Polynesia. Its name translates to Little Rapa, which is meant to distinguish it from its neighbor Easter Island, whose name is Rapa Nui. It's not a very big island. It only has a population of 507 as of 2017. But the entire place is covered in mountains, with the highest elevation of over 2,000 feet. The island is essentially the peak of a sunken volcano, one that will hopefully stay dormant for many, many years to come. Rapa Iti was originally settled in the 12th century by seafaring Polynesians. The first Europeans didn't show up until 1791. As you can imagine, it was devastating for the native population. When the Europeans arrived, they brought with them alcohol and disease. By 1830, over 75% of the indigenous inhabitants were dead. Then came the Peruvian slavers to take people from the island and sell them into slavery. When the Peruvians came, they brought smallpox. By 1866, there were only about 100 people left. It's been over 100 years, and the population has only increased by about 400. But what we are here to look at is a place called Morongo Uta, a hilltop fortress located high in the island's mountains. The fortress is the oldest of all the strongholds built by the indigenous people before the Europeans arrived. There are 14 other mountaintop fortresses on the island, which were likely built in case of a surprise attack. Polynesians had a habit of attacking other islands, and the residents of Rapa Iti were clever enough to build high-altitude forts to keep safe. Have you ever heard of Rapa Iti before? Let me know in the comments. Tiger's Nest Monastery. The Tiger's Nest Monastery in Bhutan looks like something you would expect to find in an Asian fairy tale. It's a majestic monastery clinging to the side of a mountain in one of the most isolated nations on the planet. Not only would you have a difficult time reaching the country, the trip would also require a difficult journey up the side of a mountain, with vertigo-inspiring views all the way to the top. The monastery sits about 9,000 feet above the Paro Valley. According to legend, the monastery was conceived in the 8th century by a Buddhist master named Guru Rinpoche. He was carried to the very top of the mountain on the back of his disciple, who had managed to transform herself into a tigress. When they arrived at the top of the mountain, they spent 3 years, 3 months, 3 days, and 3 hours deep in meditation in a dark cave. After they finished, the cave became one of the holiest places in Bhutan. And yet it wouldn't be until the late 17th century that the monastery was erected, built right over the mouth of the legendary cavern. Would you like to visit the Tiger's Nest Monastery? Let me know in the comments below. Kizil Caves. The Kizil Caves in China date back almost 2,000 years ago. The massive cave complex is believed to be one of the first major Buddhist projects undertaken in China. Buddhist monks began construction around the 3rd century AD under the rule of the Tocharian kingdom. Over the next 500 years, they carved 236 cave temples into the side of a massive mountain. Some of the caves were made to be chambers where monks lived, completely bare without any furniture or decorations. Then there were the larger chambers, ones used for worship and decorated with beautiful murals and sculptures from Buddhist mythology. These days, the murals are not in their original places. Many of the most impressive pieces of art were broken off the walls of the man-made caves and then taken to be preserved at museums throughout China. One of the most important parts of the site as a whole is that the murals are devoid of Chinese influence. Only 2 out of 236 caves show any connection to Tang, China, proving just how ancient and remote the monks were. This place was constructed by Buddhists who didn't care about what was happening outside their remote mountains. It wasn't until the Silk Road bludgeoned its way through the region in the 8th century AD that outside influences came into effect. Suddenly, there were Greeks, Muslims, and representatives of China visiting the previously isolated monks. The Kuelap Fortress. The Kuelap Fortress is one of the largest and most significant monuments anywhere in the Americas. It was a fortified citadel high in the Andes Mountains of Peru, about 9,000 feet above sea level. The citadel contained political buildings, religious structures, and military fortifications. Within these strong walls were 420 stone dwellings where the mountain people lived. Archaeologists have found murals here, ancient carvings in the rocks, and geometric friezes. The citadel had walls that reached 60 feet tall, made from limestone blocks so big it seems impossible that ancient humans carried them. In fact, the giant limestone blocks seem even more impossible since they would have needed to be moved up the side of a mountain. The Kuilap fortress was an extremely impressive place, and yet its inhabitants were even more impressive. The people who built this city were the Chachapoya civilization. This was a culture that came into existence around 900 AD and flourished for 500 years. They were warriors of the mountains, with roughly 300,000 members in their high-altitude kingdom. They had merchants, farmers, magical shamans, but most of the men were warriors. They were one of the last regional kingdoms to collapse during the Spanish conquest of the 16th century. That was when Kuilap was abandoned and forgotten by the world. The cave temples of the Himalayas. In a far-flung corner of the Himalaya mountains, there are mysterious caves carved on the side of a flat mountain face. The caves have been here for thousands of years, so high up nobody entered them until 2007. That was when a team of scientists and climbers finally scaled the mountain and entered the caves for the first time. The caves are located in Upper Mustang, also called the Kingdom of Mustang. Its history goes back to the 13th century, when it became an independent kingdom ruled by a unique Tibetan culture. From between the 15th and 17th centuries, the kingdom controlled all trade moving between the Himalayas and India. Nepal annexed the area in the 18th century, and they became a dependency in 1795. But the residents didn't really respect the annexation and still considered themselves an independent kingdom. Access was restricted to outsiders until 1992, making it one of the most preserved regions on the planet. Coming here is like walking through a time machine. It was only in 2008 when the Kingdom of Mustang officially lost its status and became a republic. Since then, pressing forces from the outside world, mainly China, have been a terrible influence. Development work is now transforming the entire landscape, ruining what was preserved for so long. But let's move back to the caves. There are over 10,000 artificial caves dug into the sides of valleys and high up on the mountainsides in Upper Mustang. Most of them contain partially mummified human remains, many upwards of 3,000 years old. Research has only been going on for a brief time, so experts still don't know who built the caves or why, and many are still largely unexplored. The Roman mountain gods. A hiker was recently walking through the Swiss Alps when he came across an ancient Roman coin. I say walking, but the hiker was really on a massive trek through the mountains. After they reported his discovery to the local authorities, archaeologists climbed the mountain to investigate. What they dug up was truly impressive. They found the remains of what they believe could be an ancient mountain shrine, a place where Romans gave praise to their gods. The hiker made the discovery in 2020, but excavations didn't start until 2022. In the past year, the team of archaeologists from Bern in Switzerland uncovered 100 coins, 27 rock crystals, 59 shoe nails, and a handful of other random items. It's not that unusual to find a Roman coin here and there in the Alps, as they may have been lost by travelers moving across the mountains. But this place in particular has a lot of coins. Too many coins. The study's project manager, Regula Gubler, believes the sheer number of coins points to a site of worship. What's truly shocking is how far away from civilization the site is. It's not exactly somewhere you could reach on a day trip. If you were living in ancient Rome, a visit to this sanctuary would have meant a few weeks off work. The potential site of the shrine is 8,500 feet above sea level, between the peaks of Ammertenhorn and Wildstrubel. Researchers have not found any physical evidence of a shrine or a temple. However, they do believe that so many coins and objects point to a site of pilgrimage. There was something here drawing people up the mountain, possibly a shrine where Romans would feel closer to their mysterious gods. the lost city of Karon. There's a mysterious archaeological site in the mountains of Central Asia that has been called the Machu Picchu of Tajikistan. It's the lost city of Karon, an ancient place in such a remote region of the world, it's hard to imagine people ever lived here. There are no paved roads, there are vast swaths of mountains stretching past the horizon, and almost no humans. The population density is puny, with about 1 person per every square mile. The mountainous region is so open and poorly populated that nobody ever came across the lost city of Karon until recently. It wasn't discovered until archaeologist Yusuf Shoyukubov found it in 2012. Even though the area near the Pamir Mountains might seem empty and desolate, people have lived in this part of Tajikistan for thousands of years. All throughout the mountains are scattered shrines left behind from a bygone age. Shrines and sanctuaries built by people long forgotten, dedicated to gods whose names nobody speaks any longer. Inside the lost city of Karon is what's believed to be the only surviving Zoroastrian water temple in Central Asia. It dates back around 4,000 years. The city also contains the crumbling ruins of a castle, what might be a palace, and other decimated buildings. It's in the mountains not far from the border of Afghanistan, meaning it likely won't be as popular as Machu Picchu anytime soon. We don't even really know who built the city, other than that it must have been a lost ancient culture. Lost Ranch Ruins. Just outside the city of Phoenix in Arizona is a little-known ruin with a mysterious past. The ruin can be found in South Mountain Park, safely hidden high up on the ridge and overlooking the sprawling scrub desert. Locals call it Lost Ranch, but nobody seems to know where exactly it came from. There's almost nothing left of the ruin now except some fragments of brick walls and a very old fireplace. It looks like the ruins of somebody's house. But from when? It could have been built in the 50s as a secret cabin up in the mountains. It may have been built 100 years ago by early arrivals to the West. Some sources say it was a nudist resort visited by Hollywood elites. And some say it was a failed venture to create a resort in the mountains outside the city. Others think it might just be the ruins of an ordinary mining camp that was abandoned when the miners didn't strike gold. The truth is a little less mysterious. Between 1933 and 1940, there were 4,000 men working out of camps in the South Mountain Park. This was while the state was busy constructing hiking trails and horse paths, making the park safe and fun for visitors. The ruins could be from one of the camps. The ruins could also belong to a destroyed speakeasy used during Prohibition. Şanlıurfa. Şanlıurfa is a conservation zone in Turkey, a place that contains the ruins of the legendary Kingdom of Edessa from 2,000 years ago. Edessa began as a city in the mountains, founded by the great king Seleucus I Nicator at the end of the 4th century BC. King Seleucus also happened to be the founder of the mighty Seleucid Empire. The city quickly became the capital of its own kingdom, as the Seleucid Empire grew in power. But after the Seleucids were overpowered by the Romans, it became a Roman colony. That was around 212 AD. The city later became a center for Christian learning, and then was used in the Crusades as a base of operations for the Knights Templar. The ancient city didn't end up being destroyed until the end of the Crusades, with the siege of Edessa in 1144. Inside the archaeological zone is an ancient necropolis. Archaeologists have identified over 130 rock tombs dating back to the beginnings of Edessa. These tombs were carved into the side of a mountain, scooped out of the bare rock, and then filled with the bodies of the dead. Many of the cave structures contain the bodies of locals, while others were clearly built after the Roman assimilation. The massive graveyard is known as the Kizil Koyun Necropolis, located just on the outskirts of the modern city of Urfa, built over the bones of Edessa. The Tower of Silence.
There is a forbidden tower deep in the jungles of India where mysterious rituals have been carried out for centuries. The tower belongs to a small group of Zoroastrians, maintaining their ancient customs that date back an estimated 3,000 years.
Zoroastrianism officially entered the history records in the 6th century BC, though it may have been around for over 1,000 years before that, with no documentation. The ancient Iranian religion is one of the oldest in the world, and much like Christianity, was based on the teachings of a self-proclaimed prophet. This prophet was Zoroaster, who taught his disciples about the ultimate quest for goodness. The religion teaches that there is pure good and pure evil in the world, but the good will always triumph. They were also one of the first religions to have a supreme benevolent deity. It went by the name Ahura Mazda, or Lord of Wisdom. You won't find too many Zoroastrians wandering the streets today. Most of them are long extinct, and there are ruined Zoroastrian temples all across Persia. Even though the eternal flame still burns at the fire temple in Yazd, Zoroastrianism has mostly fizzled out. It started to decline with the rise of Judaism, then Christianity, but it was the creation of Islam in the 7th century AD that truly killed the faith. The few Zoroastrians left can be found in North America, India, and Iran. Do you know any Zoroastrian? Let me know in the comments. There is a small band of Zoroastrians still thriving in Mumbai, India. They have a community that practices ancient burial customs at a funerary tower inside a 54-acre forest. As per tradition, whenever one of their community members dies, their body is placed at the top of the Tower of Silence on a flat platform. The body remains in the brutal heat of the sun, decomposing until scavenger birds pick up the scent. The vultures then descend on the Tower of Silence, picking apart the deceased until nothing remains. The Tower of Silence is forbidden to outsiders. You are not allowed to step foot on the platforms where so many devotees of Zoroastrianism have been eaten by vultures. This is very ancient, sacred stuff right out of myths. There are 3 main rows on the tower. The outermost row is for men, the center row for women, and the core is for children. There is a small chamber inside the tower where prayers can be said. The tower was built about 300 years ago and has been used consistently since then. However, a changing climate has led to the steep decline in the vulture population. It looks like soon the vultures might all be gone, and there will be no birds of prey left to pick apart the remains of the dead.
And now for number 9. But first, it's shout out time. I want to give a big thank you to Dina Sam for the super thanks and for your recommendation. We appreciate your feedback. If you are new, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. We'd love to have you.
The Bank of England's Gold Vault. The Bank of England is one of the richest in the world, and its vaults are impenetrable. If there is one modern forbidden place you're never going to enter, it's the Gold Vaults, hidden underneath the Bank of England. These ultra-secure rooms hold over $200 billion worth of solid gold bars. There are so many gold bars in the vaults that if you stacked them on top of each other, you could make 46 Eiffel Towers. That's about 5,659 tons of gold as of 2019. And yet that's only 1/5 of all the gold in the entire world. It's still a very impressive collection, and it's all squirreled away far beneath Threadneedle Street in London. The history of the bank and its vaults goes back further than you might think. The bank was founded in 1694, making it the 8th oldest bank in the world. Starting in 1734, the bank established its base of operations on Threadneedle Street in the heart of London. It was originally owned by the stockholders, but became a nationalized bank in 1946. The underground vault was built shortly before World War II in the 1930s. I've been saying vaults a lot because the true scope of the underground is immense. There is a main vault, singular, that's about 300,000 square feet. That's nearly 10 football fields, and all of it is encased in thick concrete walls. But inside the main vault are smaller vaults where the gold bars are stored on shelves. So many gold bars that they could make you the richest person in the world.
The Bank of England says they have never been robbed. Their vaults are protected by a comprehensive electronic security system. They have voice recognition, complex locks, and keys that are over 3 feet long, so don't get any ideas.
The Bank of England is almost as secure as the United States Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the biggest gold repository in the world, with a quarter of the planet's gold stashed inside. The gates of hell closed. There has been a fiery crater burning in the Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan since 1971. Near the tiny village of Darvaza, where only 350 people live, is what looks like a burning red pit that leads down to Hades. The hole is 230 feet wide and known locally as the doorway to hell or the gateway to hell. It's so bright and so hot that its fiery red glow can be seen for miles in every direction. It's not literally a gateway to the realm of the damned, but in fact the result of an accident that happened in the 1970s. The Soviets were out in the desert drilling for oil when their rig accidentally broke into a huge underground gas cavern. This was a pocket in the earth full of natural gas, so it was like drilling into a gigantic gas tank full of fumes. The ground collapsed, the entire drilling rig fell into the pit, and poisonous fumes leaked out. The Soviets tried desperately to stop the inevitable catastrophe by lighting the hole on fire. They figured the natural gas would burn itself out in a few weeks. But it's been over 50 years, and the gas is still burning. Somewhere way down in the fire is the original rig, somewhere very hot to touch. And although this seems like a pretty obvious place to avoid, it's been a major tourist destination for years. Curious travelers trek across the desert to witness the gates of hell in all of its burning glory.
However, this place could be forbidden soon. In 2022, the president of Turkmenistan ordered his government to put the fire out. It hasn't been snuffed out just yet, but the government is trying to subdue the flames and stop people from wandering into the Karakum Desert. Would you ever visit the Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan to see the gates of hell for yourself? Let me know in the comments.
The Kuril Islands. There is a string of islands north of Japan, south of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, and very far from everything else. The Kuril Islands is the name of the volcanic archipelago that consists of 56 individual islands and a lot more smaller islands. Throughout the 56 islands, the population is spread thin at only 20,000. But unlike so many beautiful remote islands in the Pacific, you won't find tourists on the Kuril Islands. This place has been in the middle of a land dispute between Russia and Japan since World War II. The Japanese say the southernmost islands are theirs, while Russia says it all belongs to them. But the true history of the island goes back much further than this petty squabble between nations. It was the Ainu people who inhabited the Kuril Islands in the days before the 17th century. However, nobody knows how long they were there. We have no records of these people up until the age of exploration. They left behind very little in the way of archaeological evidence and definitely no written records. What we do know is that during the Edo period, which lasted from 1603 to 1868, the Japanese administration took control of the islands. Around that same time, Russian Cossacks landed on the islands and claimed them for themselves. By the time the 19th century came to an end, Imperial Japan had forced the assimilation of the native Ainu people. They didn't wipe them out, but they did grant them automatic Japanese citizenship and absorbed them into their culture. So they wiped them out in a different way. The Ainu were required to take Japanese names and give up any religious practices native to the island. They had to stop tattooing, seize all sacrifices, and destroy their past. There may have been ruins on the islands at some point of an ancient civilization, but the Japanese likely destroyed them. The Paris Morgue. In 1864, a new kind of theater opened in the city of Paris. The theater was completely free. Anyone could go on any day of the week, and street vendors got rich from peddling nuts and fruit to the curious new patrons. But it wasn't a French play that they were watching, and it wasn't a musical recital. This was the Paris Morgue. The exhibition hall had a wall of curtains, and on the other side of that wall was a display of rapidly rotting corpses. The Paris Morgue was one of the most popular places to be in the 19th century. It was more popular than most museums are today, with an estimated 40,000 people a day filing through the exhibition hall to gawk at the decaying human bodies. Many of these bodies had just been pulled out of the river, so they were encrusted with barnacles or brutally picked over by the fish. Despite the awful appearance of the recently deceased, people still lined up to gape through the plate glass viewing window and into the morgue. The original purpose of the exhibition hall was to trick the public into identifying the unclaimed dead who showed up at the city morgue. But according to Vanessa Schwartz from the University of Southern California, it was also a show. She compared it to reality TV or a true crime documentary, saying the Parisians couldn't get enough of it. They had murder victims, river bodies, and other mysteries and dramas unfolding right before their eyes. But of course, not everybody was so impressed with the vulgar display. One visiting student from Harvard wrote in 1885 that the spectacle was grim. and that those watching were thirsty with greediness. Parents held up their children to better see the rotting corpses in the room, and people elbowed and shoved to get a better look at the blank faces of the dead. The public exhibition hall was finally closed in 1907 because it didn't seem moral anymore. The Paris morgue is still around, but it's obviously forbidden to watch dissections and autopsies. Dead Man's Island. Off the coast of Vancouver, British Columbia, there is a small island barely big enough to support a house. It's at the southern part of Stanley Park in Cole Harbour, given the name of Dead Man Island in 1937. Throughout its history, the island has been a place of battle, a cemetery, and a secret hideaway for smallpox sufferers. It's currently home to the HMCS Discovery, a division of the Royal Canadian Navy Reserve. The first mention of the island comes from John Morton, who visited in 1862. John was one of the first white settlers of Vancouver and discovered hundreds of mysterious red cedar boxes secured to the trees on the island. Several of these red boxes had broken open, and they lay on the ground in fragments of smashed wood, black hair, and pale white bones. As John would soon learn, the island was used as a tree burial ground by the Squamish people for centuries. This seemed to encourage John more than dissuade him, and he tried to purchase the island for himself. He only changed his mind when a local chief told him the story about a battle that happened between the rival tribes on the island, in which 200 warriors died. He thought of all that blood and death, finally convinced John to leave the island alone. Instead of building a house on it, settlers in Vancouver used it as their own cemetery up until 1887. The misuse of the island continued in the years that followed. Vancouverites used Dead Man's Island as a quarantine site for those inflicted with smallpox. Even today, the island is being used by the Canadian Navy instead of being left alone as an Aboriginal heritage site. There is currently a dispute between the city of Vancouver and the First Nations tribes, who claim the island is their land and should be left alone since it is a burial ground. What do you think should become of Dead Man's Island? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Mount Athos. Mount Athos in Greece is home to some of the most beautiful monasteries in the world. There are over 20 monasteries on the peninsula, where an estimated 700 monks enjoy long lives of chastity. These monks devote their lives to prayer and maintenance, worshiping God, fasting, repairing, and studying. The monasteries are breathtaking, built on the edge of great cliffs and overlooking the blue waters of the Aegean Sea. And while the monasteries do welcome visitors, none of them allow women visitors inside. Since the year 382 AD, it has been utterly forbidden for any female of any kind, including everything from a pig to a human, to step foot on Mount Athos. To visit Mount Athos and see its monasteries for yourself, you need to submit your passport to the Pilgrims Bureau. They allow 100 Orthodox males onto the island per day, and 10 non-Orthodox males who wish to visit. Any women have to stay behind at the ferry terminal and wait. They haven't been on the island in 1,000 years, and it's all because of a legend involving Virgin Mary and a stray wind. Tradition has the Virgin Mary was on her way to Cyprus when her sailing ship got stranded on Mount Athos. She loved the island and its mountains so much that she called it the Garden of the Mother God. Mary said she would be the only woman to ever step foot on it. Early Christian monks in Greece took the story very seriously. It was already understood that women were not allowed in monasteries, but they took the rule to an extreme level by forbidding them to step foot on their island. It's a total no girls allowed zone. The Cenacle. The Cenacle is perhaps the holiest place in Christianity that you've never heard of. According to tradition, this is the site where Jesus had his Last Supper. It's the very room in which Jesus Christ sat with his 12 disciples and shared a meal during Passover. It was the eve of his death, right before he was betrayed and crucified. The room is on Mount Zion, just outside the old city walls of Jerusalem. It's a simple room inside a stone building that you would never guess was the site of such a fantastic piece of history. Mount Zion is considered the holiest place on the planet to Christians and the closest possible location to God. The tomb of David is supposedly hidden just beneath the cenacle as well, but that's a whole story of its own. The New Testament says that Jesus gave his disciples wine and bread, and that the wine symbolized his blood and the bread his flesh. He sat in this room with his disciples and feasted, and then a bunch of other exciting things happened after his death. The disciples continued to meet here briefly after Jesus Christ was killed. This was also the place where on the Pentecost, the disciples of Jesus gathered and felt the Holy Spirit fill them, and they spoke in many languages. It was from this room that the disciples each embarked upon their own mission, spreading Christianity to the farthest reaches of the globe. An archaeological survey conducted in 1948 by Jacob Pinkerfeld revealed the original structure was likely a synagogue, then later remodeled by early Jewish Christians. But so much destruction has happened here that it's proved difficult to date every piece of the structure. It may have been destroyed during the siege of Jerusalem by Roman general Titus in 70 AD. Most scholars believe the current room dates back only 800 years to the Crusades, when the Knights Templar built a cathedral here. Regardless how old the room is, Christians view it as the place where Jesus last died before his death. It's part of the same complex that hosted Pentecost, the resurrection, and the washing of the feet. You are allowed inside the room, but only with a guided tour, and don't even try to touch anything. It's the holiest room in Jerusalem. The Red Forest. Shortly after midnight on April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. It was one of the greatest radioactive disasters of all time, releasing invisible radioactive dust into the atmosphere. The roof of the reactor collapsed, the core continued to melt, and huge plumes of smoke wafted into the sky. Near the plant, a large patch of pine trees was hit by a particularly strong blast of radiation. The trees turned red and then died. All these years later, this little stretch of woods is called the Red Forest. Scientists believe it's still the most radioactive outdoor environment on our planet. The Red Forest is about 400 hectares. It received the most significant dosage of fallout in the surrounding area. Most trees died immediately, wilting within minutes to a deep red or a rusty orange color. Based on information released at an international conference in 1996, the soil of the Red Forest was contaminated with over 400 times more radioactive material than what was released at Hiroshima. The bomb that decimated Hiroshima in World War II only released 3 million curies of radiation. Chernobyl spewed out about 200 million, give or take a few million. The forest is still considered an exclusion zone, a forbidden area nobody is allowed to enter because it's simply too dangerous. The Greenbrier Bunker. In 1955, Americans were scared of a nuclear holocaust. President Eisenhower instructed the Department of Defense to come up with an emergency plan that would save Congress if a nuclear bomb hit America. The plan needed to be foolproof, accounting for what would happen if a nuclear strike hit Washington, D.C., and the White House was obliterated. The Department of Defense ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to find a suitable location for a nuclear bunker. They decided on White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. They built the secret nuclear bunker underneath a luxury resort called Greenbrier. The site was chosen because of its relative closeness to Washington, and because it was believed to be a safe distance from any atomic target. Greenbrier also served as an internment camp in World War II, when Japanese, Italians, and Germans were held against their will. Then it was a military hospital and later a luxury resort. Construction started in 1957. Although the government tried to keep it a secret, locals were suspicious immediately. The government claimed they were building a new wing, but the amount of concrete going in was ridiculous. One of the construction workers was quoted as saying, "Nobody came out and said it was a bomb shelter, but even a fool would have known." After the installation of 110 urinals, it became pretty clear to everyone involved that there wasn't a new exhibition hall being installed. The project cost $14 million and was finished in 1962. It was buried 720 feet underground and could withstand a nuclear blast from 30 miles away. As we now know, there never was a nuclear war. The bunker remained a secret until 1992, but was never used for anything. The bunker was decommissioned, but its ruins are still at Greenbrier. You're allowed to take a peek, but only on a private tour, and you're not allowed to bring any cameras into the bunker. Thanks for watching! Which forbidden place would you like to visit if you could? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe! See you next time! Bye!